With us this morning, Phil. What did you make of the whole thing?
I'm just glad it's over, to be honest. We don't have to really talk about international football now for another few months. Obviously, I would echo what Stewie Byrne said there. I just thought, the way things are at the moment during the pandemic, most managers now have the option of playing with 5 substitutes. Use them, because it was quite clear that certain things weren't working. The midfield has been an issue for the last couple of managers, and the hope was players like Jayson Molumby will come in. Obviously he was suspended last night, but you want players that get on the ball. I thought Josh Cullen did very well when he came in and got on the ball, and he showed that he wanted it, but also at times got himself out of trouble, and that's what you need. That if Stephen Kenny's style of play is to evolve and you want to be a success, he needs midfielders that want the ball, but not only do they want the ball, that they can get themselves out of trouble in tight spaces, and Cullen showed that.
So so let's say everybody's fit, which will never happen, but let's say everybody's fit. You're putting Cullen in your team?
I don't know if he gets into the team. I mean, the hope is Molumby, but I mean, it was clear enough actually watching the Wales game the other day that he didn't look as sharp as he had done, because he hasn't played any football for Brighton.
Okay, so let's assume he's not playing football, right? Let's go to March, and Molumby's on the bench at Brighton getting occasional games here and there, but Josh Cullen's put down 35 consecutive appearances, tearing up trees and really justifying the fact that he went to Anderlecht. He starts, right?
Yeah, but I think the hope there, you mentioned Molumby in March, the hope that is he gets out of Brighton in January, that he gets a loan deal. I know Nathan spoke to Graham Potter before the start of the season, and Molumby came up in conversation, and they obviously would attract how he did at Millwall last season, and he was in that situation where he might get some game time. Obviously he played League Cup, but then Brighton have now moved Ben White into midfield, and that then obviously puts Molumby further down the pecking order. But you mentioned Jason Knight there. He's only going to get better. Actually, obviously, he started in the centre, but when he went out to the right, he actually looked decent enough as well. I think, it's only going to be a good thing for him playing alongside Wayne Rooney at Derby, and obviously he has played alongside Rooney. Surely that can only be a good thing for the development of a young player. So there certainly is hope in terms of younger players coming through. I think my biggest disappointment so far has actually been the more senior players, and as each game has gone on, we're now 8 games without a win, but the confidence you can see is just getting drained out of the more senior players bit by bit. We're no longer passing the ball out as much as we did at the back. You think back to that Slovakia game, it was the most important game under Stephen Kenny, and there was times where you could see it. It was like, right, this is what we're going to try and do. And there's players that hadn't done that under, say, McCarthy and Martin O'Neill, but they were doing it on that night against Slovakia, and you thought, yeah, there's definitely a future in this. But it was notable against Wales as well that we went more direct at times. Now, is that a case that players are just so short of confidence, they've been told, don't mess around with it at the back? You think there was a few situations last night where we gave the ball away. Shane Duffy gave a ball away, Conor Howran gave a ball away, where we nearly got punished. People would say that's because we're trying to overplay. I don't think it was trying to overplay. I think it was just really poor execution, and there's going to have to come a time where Stephen Kenny says, right, there's certain players that just aren't going to fit into what I'm trying to do, and I don't care who you are. But my feeling was he has the job now, and reputations have to be put aside. If players aren't doing it, you got to get rid of it.
You're talking about Duffy?
Well, look, Shane Duffy has had a really tough time off the pitch. His confidence looks shot. He was wearing the captain's armband. He's always going to turn up for international games. The hope is that by the time March comes around, his form will be a lot better. But, he's in a high-pressure situation at Celtic where he's just been left out of the team. They're trailing Rangers as they go for 10 in a row. They can't afford to be dropping points. So I don't know what that environment is going to do for Shane Duffy. I hope he comes out the other side of it.
Okay, so I actually think if you look at last night's team, there's probably a bunch of players who did stand up and will actually then therefore have played themselves into the reckoning. I think Josh Cullen is one of them.
Yeah.
I think Knight is another one. If you're the Ireland manager and you've got a midfielder who's playing week in, week out in the Championship, and nobody else in midfield is playing week in, week out, then he has to be in the reckoning for game time.
Yeah, I think game time, but I'm not sure about starting. So
pick your starting midfield for me then.
Well, I mean, I personally, I prefer, at the moment, I would prefer to go with a 4-2-3-1. So I would put Molumby as one of the two. So, is he going to put Molumby and Cullen in there? I said, so much can change between now and March. So, as we've seen in the last few months, we don't know what the situation is going to be like with COVID, but Stephen Kenny can't think that far ahead to March and who's going to be available, because if anything we've learned over the last few weeks is nothing's a certainty in terms of team selection. And I think the likes of Jayson Knight, Darragh O'Shea, even Ryan Manning, was a tough night for Ryan Manning, but you're making your debut for your country. It's bound to be a nervy night for you, given the magnitude of what it signifies. This will hopefully stand to the players in the future, where those players that have made their debuts now don't have to worry about that when they're called upon in the future. But yeah, I think it's a conversation maybe we have in February or early March of what kind of team we start the first World Cup qualifier with, because you look at the back four last night. I've actually been very impressed with Darragh O'Shea. Even when he came on against England, I like when he gets the ball, he looks forward and he passes with a bit of positivity and a bit of crispness.
Yeah, and he was breaking forward trying to score.
Put in some good crosses as well last night.
There's a flexibility to his game. He's first defensive sub if he's not in the team.
Yeah.
I think the back four is going to be Egan +1 now. I think Duffy is droppable, and whichever right back he goes with, and obviously Enda Stevens is going to be left back if he's fully fit. At this stage, are you willing to pick a midfield, Owen?
Well, I think that it's Hendrick and McCarthy right now, because they are the two midfielders who are playing Premier League game time and are playing meaningful game time. Conor Hourihane has been dropped, and Hourihane versus Molumby is spot number 3. Now, if you play the two in midfield, the one in front of them, say the number 10, you could potentially play Hendrick in there, for example. But for me, it's McCarthy and Hendrick ahead of everybody else at the moment, and that's just the reality of being Premier League players. I know Jeff Hendrick has become this Marmite player for Ireland. Like, there's actually been a lot of positivity around Jeff Hendrick over the last couple of weeks and months, which is kind of rare to see, because largely he's getting slated. So I think there's a bit of a culture war over Jeff Hendrick as a player, as a standalone player at the moment. But McCarthy being a Crystal Palace midfielder and playing week in, week out is the most important thing there, and he has to start for me. So that's what I would say. But I definitely think Molumby has the highest ceiling, and he's been very, very good for this specific team as well, for this Ireland team, and I wouldn't be surprised at all to see him in there.
Like even James McCarthy now, he's been left out of the Crystal Palace team because Riedewald has gone in there and he's done really well, and he's kind of gone down the pecking order, and that's what I mean. Things can change so quickly, where you're mentioning Molumby. Like, Molumby could get a loan move to another club, he could go to the Championship, and by January, a couple of months of Championship football under his belt, then he's got his sharpness back. So, and Hendrick, I know what you mean about Hendrick. A lot of people, fortunately for Jeff Hendrick, he played so well at the Euros in 2016 that he set the bar so high, and he hasn't hit those heights since. But there's definitely been signs under Stephen Kenny that he wants to get on the ball more. And, there is times he'll give the ball away, but I've no problem if a player gives the ball away, because they're going to try something. And rather than just go through a game as a passenger where you actually have to question whether they're even playing, because it's been so long since you've seen them on the ball or heard their name mentioned. And I kind of felt Hourihane fell into that category last night, where, this is a guy that has been left out of the Villa team now because Ross Barkley has come in, and we know how good he is with his left foot, but I'd really like to see a bit more personality from him on the pitch, where he's demanding the ball and just playing with a bit more intensity. And at times, I said last night, you didn't even know he was playing.
Well, what's the midfield's 3 going to be, say, in 2 years' time? I know it's impossible to project that, but on the current trajectories, is it a situation where it's going to be Molumby, Knight and Josh Cullen? Should we start investing in that trio and seeing how they go? It would have been great to have seen the 3 of them together over the last while. The thing is that the room for experimentation is gone.
If you're given a 4-year deal and you think you're going to get the opportunity to build a team for the Euros, but that's not what happens in international football. He's actually got to start winning games next March, because already the comments are coming in, and I'll get to them in a minute, where people are calling for his head, and that's the cut and thrust of international football. And you can't pick a team for the future these games you get a little bit of wiggle room, but you don't get any wiggle room with the games in March, because that's World Cup qualifiers. There might be fans back in the stadium. There will be raucous attention. If there's not an atmosphere, there will be raucous attention, at least, on the game in a way that will be ratcheted up even from these games, because we all know they're essentially glorified friendlies. The whole pot 2 thing wasn't really an option after what had happened last week, unless a miracle. And like, we were relying on Northern Ireland, who had just had their hearts broken last week, doing us a favour, and it didn't happen. So
Serbia did. Fair play to Serbia. We'll remember that. 5-0 they beat Russia.
Phil, good stuff. Thanks a million for anything else. Any last point you want to give us on the Ireland game?
Well, as I said, I think the sooner we forget about 2020, the better. And yeah, like the draw, just looking at the draw, I mean, there's a good chance we could get Denmark again. We could get Wales, we could get Slovakia, we could get Georgia. But there really isn't that much difference between pot 2 and pot 3, because if we're in pot 2, there's plenty of teams in pot 3 that will cause us problems. We're in pot 3, there's plenty of teams in pot 2 that we wouldn't want to play either. So I'm not really too worried about that, but I definitely agree that when the World Cup qualifiers come around, people that are calling for Stephen Kenny's head now, that's going to go up a few notches if we don't score goals and don't start winning games. And unfortunately, that is the nature of international football. I just would have liked to have seen those substitutions made earlier, because this is an unbelievable opportunity. This is the job Stephen Kenny wanted. I just would like to see him be a bit braver.
Congratulations to Shane Duffy on winning the Irish International Goal of the Year 2020 competition. Good man yourself, Shane. I'm sure that'll have pride of place on your mantelpiece. Let's